This is Dan McNerney's submission for Game Engine 1, Milestone 2. Let's go ahead and fire it up. So we've got a very, very exciting grid of shapes. Now, on a couple of different computers, the performance has been a little bit different. Most notably, everything's essentially been running slower. Rotation's been running slower. Camera movement's been running slower. So I left the cylinder in the lower right-hand corner spinning its brains out, so you'd be able to see, very obviously something spinning fast. So we've got our minimum 16 objects spinning around, moving, doing all kinds of different things. In the top left, we've got the cube loaded up from File with a nice texture on it. Cube with a color shader, cube with a constant color shader, and cube with a color wireframe. In the next column, we have a cube with a Phong lighting shader on it, which I put in. We've got a couple of pyramids. Now, the pyramids, I'm struggling quite a bit with making my own shapes, and so these pyramids, my thought process is I think that their normals are all facing the wrong directions. So essentially what you're seeing when you're looking at a pyramid is you're looking through it. I'm going to try to ease up a little bit. Yeah, so you're seeing backwards through it. So you're seeing the back side of each of the angles. Next to that, you've got my nice little diamonds, which is just a pyramid with an inverted point and a couple more triangles mapped in by hand. So one side of that diamond, the bottom half of it is displaying correctly. The top half is still having that pyramid issue where you can look through it. So you'll see the interior base, which I left the interior sides on there since you could see it. So maybe we can chalk it up to some avant-garde programmer art. And then we've got this 5-sided cylinder that I tried to bring in from Blender. Once again, I think the normals are off a little bit. Well, off a lot of it. So it's really not mapping textures at all. So this top is supposed to be a texture map. Once again, I think that's supposed to be duckweed again. It's really not taking that texture. You can see on the color, which is the second one down, with the color by vert, it's not seeming to map it correctly, especially when we consider, you can kind of see at the very bottom one that it's got quite a few more phases on it, so it should be, giving us a lot more gradual color on it. So there's my objects. My camera moves around independently. Now on this computer, the camera swings up and down, rotates very, very severely, so I'm going to be very ginger on that. So we got some nice little rotations here. For a while, I was having an issue where I did my math wrong on the Phong, and it was unhinged from the world, and it was moving with origin, so everything would rotate without it, but I got that sorted out. That was fun when I first started applying independent rotations to it. And then, WASD keys are kind of set up to strafe, a la a kind of modern first-person shooter. Arrow keys angle us around. W moves forward. I and O moves forward as well and out as well. Sorry, W and S move forward and out. N is going to take me to my other camera, so I've got another camera that's kind of perched kind of above and behind looking downwards, and another one that's just at this kind of backwards angle looking at it from the back of the model. Ooh, sorry about that. Yeah, great. So let's take a quick look at some of the code. I would say some of the worst offenders I have in here are probably like how I treat my game objects. So I wasn't really sure what to do without like a more in-depth hierarchy. That's kind of why I didn't really want to do any objects moving around each other. I would just kind of either have to set them around globally or set them to the or have them moving around origin. I figure translation of an object's pretty trivial. So now, most of my models do not read from File. We've got the cube model that you provided, which goes ahead and reads from File. With many of the other models, I was continuing to update them. So we got this beautiful, beautiful cylinder. Get out of here. So you can see it's sitting in its very, very fat format. Now, what I did for the model writing, though, is I took a little bit of a crack at it. And what I wanted to do was move that up into the Model H and make it universal across all models. I didn't want to have to write and read, and I really didn't like. It was a cool trick to kind of, set up our fat data and write that directly to a file, and then read that, fat data back as a binary. But that kind of seemed weird for me, both if you needed to edit it, and then also having private create VAO play this weird role with a dip switch to write and read. So what I did was I moved that into model so they would all inherit it. To write and read from the file, and so what each model does on construction is it points its data back to this model triangle array and model data, and that way the model class, its superclass, actually has access to that. So like write model to file, we'll go check that out, and it's basically what you think it would be. So just going through, it's the same exact little chunking process. And read model from file. Same exact thing you think it would be. So it chunks it in, fills out that data, fills out those that important data for that. In graphics, here we got our nice little vert fong. This is the shader that I added specifically. It's not too complicated other than I was having a lot of issues with the fact that it calls for a view matrix, but apparently the OpenGL compiler will remove the view matrix, and so if you try to get location on it, it just finds a -1, and then that gets asserted and throws an error. So the trick was to make sure it's actually using all the matrices that it's applying. I probably would divide out this MV matrix, but into world and view and have the shader doing the work, but I was really just happy once I finally got the shader working, and once I finally figured out what was going on with the object, where it wasn't I had multiplied view times world, so the object was sitting in relation to the origin at all times. So that wasn't great. Going back up into our graphics objects, let's go ahead and let's go into our models. Let's go ahead and grab that cylinder model. So you can see that it's reading by the index buffer. So we get that big list of triangles, that big list of verts, UVs and normals, which I think that what I got from Blender, I'm interpreting it incorrectly, because those normals don't seem like they're working at all. And we go through the kind of old VAO we have, generate the VAO, create VAO, generate the VAO, create the VBO, go ahead and jam all those verts into all that data into VBO, telling it where the verts are, telling it where the UVs are, telling it where the norms are, and then in the VBO, the second VBO slot, VBO1, we're going to go ahead and put that triangle list in there, so it knows how to actually build those triangles. Great. And then game is really, really hacked together. There's some areas where this is just kind of very hacked together. There's some areas where I wasn't trying to think of what the hierarchy of this would look like, particularly around game objects. So you can see we got all the kind of classic examples of quickly hacked together, everything sitting inside of the game itself. So in the game, we're actually loading all the models, we're loading all the shaders, we're adding the textures. Here we're just chunking down our nice little objects column by column, first column, second column, third column, fourth column. Game objects are taking in rotations X or Y and Z and applying those on the update. Setting the scale of each of our objects, which we, in the demos you played around with long skinny objects, things like that, so I didn't feel a lot of need to scale around. Update input is still all in here. So you can see we're going key by key. We got some bounding on N, which causes us to move to our next camera, so we're not just hammering through cameras. So it's just checking if it was pressed in the previous frame before it checks if it was up in this frame. So we go through, we got all that inputs just sitting here nice and ugly in the update. And then the real money, which is just that unadulterated game object manager update, which, as you put in there, is just going to go through that PCS tree, iterate through, and make sure it hits every single object. So the objects don't really have any relationship to each other. They're not passing any relationship through that PCS tree. They're not managing that in any way. So they're kind of sitting there in a PCS tree, but not really using any of that hierarchy. Draws, unaltered, unload content, unaltered. And then our nice little clear buffer function, make sure that we get a nice little clear buffer. So, yep, that's pretty much the nitty-gritty of it. So thank you for your time, and have a good one. Have a good winter.